our company, we not only do we work with a lot of nonprofits, but we've really been focusing on sustainability and sort of the green movement, if you will, for a long time. Going back, one of our first big projects that we did in 2008, we pitched a series to an educational film company that we were doing a lot of work with that we ended up calling Green Careers, Sustainable Futures. So the idea was that we would create, essentially, if someone was in high school or college and trying to figure out what they want to do with their lives, we would go through all 16 of what's called a career cluster. So the government has been charged with figuring out how you can, a taxonomy of careers, and they came up with these 16 clusters for any job you could possibly have. So we found a company that would represent all 16 career clusters, and it was really great. And sometimes there end up being things you might not expect. So for instance, for law and law enforcement, we actually went and talked to Penn Future. And at that time, I got to interview Christine Knapp, who's judging for us tonight. She's now, of course, running the sustainability office for the city of Philadelphia, but that was fun. We got to meet a lot of other cool people as well. We got to travel to Colorado, to the Continental Divide, and we went to the National Research Energy Laboratory. And if you ever get an invitation to visit, I highly recommend going. Learned lots of crazy things about how photovoltaic cells are made and engineered. Got to see where they test all of the new turbines. Met a guy with a job title I didn't know existed called a tribologist, which is a physical science where he is an expert in lubricants, which I didn't know you could have an expert in lubricants and have a legitimate and non-X-rated lifestyle. So, but he figured that out, and it was even a very green job. Eventually, we ended up making our way to the Puget Sound and visited a place called Taylor's Shellfish Farms, which was really awesome for us. Our cameraman tonight has been working with me for an awfully long time. It's Dave Lamb back there. And Dave, back at this time, had a dream job that was not working at PWP Video. It would have been working for Mike Rowe on the show Dirty Jobs. And just a few months before we arrived at Taylor's Shellfish Farms, Mike Rowe did a very famous episode there where he went out with the farmers and they were harvesting something called gooey ducks. If you are not sensitive, you can put into Google image search gooey duck, which is spelled G-E-O, duck, all one word, and you will find something that is in fact a shellfish, but definitely would probably have his and him or he and him pronouns. You'll know when you see it. You will not forget it. So look up carefully. But we were privileged that we had very cool escorts for the day. Well, this is really sound like an X-rated story, doesn't it? So our producer at the time had a high school friend whose name is Marco Pinchot, but his real name is Gifford Pinchot IV. And not sure of everyone's history, but the Gifford Pinchot II was not only a two-term governor of the state of Pennsylvania, he also was the first chief of the Forestry Service of the United States and preserved millions of acres during the Roosevelt administration. Has a redwood tree named after him in Muir Woods because he was close friends with John Muir, all other kinds of honors. And so here I am with his great-grandson getting toured around and also introduced to another gentleman named Bill Dewey, who he's been with Taylor Shellfish. I actually reached out to him when I was thinking about this story, and he's still there. He's been there for about 30 years. And he's known regionally and actually internationally, spoken at the UN about water quality and water conservation because he is an advocate within the public realm for water quality so that he can farm shellfish. And the thing that's interesting about aquaculture, another good word that I learned on this trip, particularly with shellfish, is not only are they not, so a lot of fish farming doesn't necessarily have a ton of positives environmentally. Not all, frequently it's not so great. But when you do this with shellfish, they are filter feeders. So they actually remove a tremendous amount of ill from the water. But every time there's a major rainstorm and things that we don't think about, maybe people in this room do, but all of that point source pollution and oil in your driveway and things in parking lots that run into the sewer and run straight into places like Puget Sound force people like Bill Dewey to shut down farming for up to a week or more, depending on what's going on. So advocating to try to stop that and keep the sound clean is a huge deal. So these were our guides for the day. But our timing for our shoot was locked into the tides. So we got there disgustingly early. I believe we watched the sun come up as Marco freshly shucked our first oysters of the day. And I have to say, I'd never had a pre-dawn oyster before. I will recommend it, particularly if someone will shuck it for you. Much less likely to stab yourself. But then we were off and into the water and doing all of our filming with Bill, and started with clams, which is easy because there's a bunch of rocks when you're close to the shore. And eventually we make our way out further and further into the receded tide, and we're walking through this stuff called anaerobic mud, which simply just means there's no air in it whatsoever. And before we got there, we had to send ahead our shoe sizes, because it's very important that the hip waders that they give you have to fit very well. Because when you walk in anaerobic mud, you must do like this whole heel to toe thing, or else you will just sink and be lost in the tide and live with the oysters, and that's the end of you. So it sort of turned out that my boots were in fact not the right size. So I was about half a size too big. So every time I tried to walk forward, my heel was getting stuck. Now, I didn't really notice this too much until, many hours into the day when we had been way past lunch. And if any of you have ever worked with Dave Lamb, you'll know that you should never skip lunch with Dave. So he's kind of crashing, and at this point, after being out in the sun, I'm crashing. And we look back to the shore, and it turns out it feels like it was a mile away. I don't really know for sure. But Dave started to have a rough time. And I remember sort of in slow motion, as we're encouraging each other that we can make it back to the shore, he starts to fall. And this is a long time ago. We have these giant, like 15, 20-pound cameras he's carrying on his shoulder. I don't know how he did it, but he managed to coat himself in mud, but hold up 15 pounds of camera in the air and go, "I got it!" But he couldn't get back up. So Marco and Bill run over, our great environmentalists, and they scoop the camera, they scoop him up, and they get him to the shore. And I've made it about another 10 yards. And the tide is coming in, and I don't know exactly what's going to happen. But luckily, Marco and Bill did, and they just came out. This is one of the times it's very good to be small. They scooped me up under my arms, they just dragged me to the shore, and that was it. Fed us lunch, more oysters, life was beautiful, and that was our adventure for the day. So I was thinking about that kind of adventure and that kind of sharing of all these weird things that we get to learn. And I reached out to the educational film company, and I was like, it's been about a decade. Has anyone, watched my 2 hours of green job content? And I found out that I'm not sure what the DVD numbers were, because that used to be a thing. I don't know if you guys remember the round stuff. But it's been streamed like tens of thousands of times. And that's probably to whole classrooms. So I started thinking about it. It's like, it's very possible that 100,000 kids had to watch the results of our traipsing through this mud. And if a small percentage of them might have had some influence to, even if they don't pursue a fully green job, but if they think about how they can make sure that the work that they're doing every day is even just a little bit more sustainable in the long run, then maybe that next generation might actually help to save us from ourselves. So that is my green story experience for you.